The problem. I'm told that most people don't understand the problem, and it is unwise to talk directly about it lest they get confused. I should somehow talk about the problem without talking about the problem. It is said I shouldn't use the proper terminology to describe the problem because this is jargon and no one will know what I'm talking about. And the problem is so unrelenting and grim that I am ill-advised to tell the truth about it, as this will put people off because people are hardwired to be disbelieving of and unwilling to hear bad news. I hear this advice, and I choose to ignore the advice because I believe it to be flawed thinking, and I think it is part of the problem. I hold that if I speak my truth clearly and calmly, that I will be able to convey the true nature of the problem. Now, I don't know who will listen to this, but the chances are that you don't have a deep understanding of the problem. I say this because most people in my country don't have a deep understanding of the problem. Now, I studied a degree in environmental science with honours. I've worked professionally in this space, and the problem has been the main focus of my thoughts over the past 20 years or so. I believe that my understanding of the problem is both deep and broad. So I humbly ask that you allow me to speak with you as though you were new to this subject and I were your mentor. Allow me to start at the beginning. The reason why we humans get to survive on this planet is because the conditions are suitable for us. In the atmosphere, that's the gas that surrounds our planet, there is enough oxygen for us to breathe, but not so much oxygen that it makes wildfires run out of control. The right amount of rain falls to make our crops grow, but not so much rain that it causes floods that wash the soil away. The weather is relatively stable year by year, allowing us to plant crops suited to the prevailing conditions and build infrastructure suited to our needs and desires. This natural order has been very stable over the past 12,000 years since the end of the last ice age, and this has allowed human civilization to grow and grow. Today there are nearly 8,000 million human beings tied into an economic order that spans the globe. The trouble though, is that the way that we humans live on this planet is disturbing the natural order to the point that the whole Earth system is becoming perturbed. There are two interrelated aspects to this problem, the climate and the global ecosystem. Although these things are so tightly intertwined, it's often hard to tell them apart. The climate and ecological crises are fundamental as these things underpin the foundations of our societies and economics. It's like the foundations of a building. If the foundations are crumbling, there's little chance of protecting the walls and the roof. You have to fix the foundation first. And the change is happening so fast that it is overwhelming the capacity of our political systems to keep up. Let's consider the climate crisis to begin. Of all the gases in the atmosphere, a tiny proportion are called greenhouse gases. They trap heat and keep the atmosphere warm. This is a good thing. However, if you have too much greenhouse gas, the atmosphere gets very hot, and this heat gets spread around the surface of the land and soaked up in the ocean. Over billions of years, living organisms on our planet have developed the ability to finely regulate the amount of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere to keep conditions suited to life. For example, and this may come as a surprise, the tiny plants that drift around in the ocean, the phytoplankton, play a hugely important role in pulling excess CO2 from the atmosphere. The forests do the same. So you'll understand the problem when studies show that up to 40% of the phytoplankton have been lost to ocean heating, and that much of the world's forests have been cut down or burned. You'll understand that if you disable the temperature regulator, the temperature could go haywire. The ecological part of this crisis comes from us destroying wildlife and habitats and forests and coastlines, and we know that we need an abundance of wildlife to keep the biosphere stable. The climate and ecological crises are heavily interconnected, and yet they themselves are not really the problem. The problem is that the humans aren't taking the necessary actions to fix them. If we just got on with the job, the problem would be resolved within a generation. But that's not happening. Our governments demonstrate a greater allegiance to the fossil fuel industry than to the people they supposedly represent. I don't know if you followed the COP26 deliberations in Glasgow. This was the big UN get-together to thrash out pledges to reduce greenhouse emissions, to reduce the amount of heat on the planet. And what did the Australian government do? It used COP26 to spruik the Australian gas industry to investors. Governments are not doing their jobs, and they are colluding with the fossil fuel industry and in cahoots with the mainstream media that is failing in its primary mission to keep the public informed. And the big question is, why do we let this happen? Why are Western people so accommodating of political and economic systems that are destroying our natural life support systems? The answer is that we Western people are spiritually disconnected from nature. As humans, we evolved on this planet just like the trees and the bees, and we have an innate spiritual connection. But from the time we can talk and absorb the dominant culture, we lose that connection to nature. And this means that we no longer belong. The concept of belonging is common to us all. Belonging describes the relationship between a subject and a place. We would all agree that a shoe does not belong in a fridge, or that a wild animal does not belong in a hospital ward. So you'll understand that a culture that doesn't care about the biosphere does not rightly belong on a planet with a biosphere. It's like being in a hospital plugged into an intensive care unit and saying, I really don't care about all these machines. The problem is that Western culture does not belong on Earth in its present form. And yet, individually, we have the right to be here. No less than the trees and the bees, the whales and the snails. But that right comes with a responsibility to protect nature, to preserve our life support system. This is not rocket science. This is simple logic and common sense. You look after your life support system as though your life depends on it, which it does. So the responsibility falls upon us to transform our culture so that it fits in with nature. Nature has been building the systems of life on Earth for 3.8 billion years. She is not negotiating with us on this. And scientists have been telling us about this problem since the mid-1970s, and our governments have done practically nothing of substance to make things better. The scientists now tell us that we are facing the final opportunities for action. We have 3 to 4 years left. That doesn't mean that we've got 3 to 4 years before all the humans are dead. It means that we have 3 to 4 years to start making profound changes in our carbon emissions, beyond which time we lose our capacity to influence events. Then we become just spectators in a rapidly unfolding collapse that we can no longer constrain. This crisis goes by different names, one of which is Ecological Collapse. And this is already happening. Just most people don't know what it looks like. How could they? Drowning doesn't look like drowning. We assume that drowning people wave their arms around and shout, "Help, help!" They don't. That's Hollywood nonsense. It's not like that. Instead, they hyperventilate with their head tilted back facing the shore, with their mouth at water level, desperately fanning the water to keep the air flowing into their lungs. It actually looks quite peaceful from a distance. Many people drown within meters of friends and family because people don't know what a drowning person looks like. So if regular people can't tell what a drowning person looks like, how are they supposed to know what a drowning planet looks like? Well, I'll tell you what to look for. There's a graph called the Keeling Curve. If you know about greenhouse gases and climate change and the cascade of climate tipping points, just one glance at that graph will tell you we're going down. Or find some data on ocean acidification over the past 50 years. That's all you need to know about the collapse of the ocean ecosystem. And take a look at the World Wildlife Fund Living Planet Report 2020. This is pictures and tables and graphs and little boxes that summarize the key points. 65% of wildlife killed off by humans over the past 50 years. Or the science paper that says of all the mammals on Earth by weight, 96% are humans and livestock and only 4% are wildlife. This is what ecosystem collapse looks like. But most people don't recognize these things. And this is what I'm trying to alert you to. I read these papers, I understand how all these things fit together. And these things are clear as day if only you know what to look for. The signs are everywhere, and they have been drifting in and out of your view for decades. And you've known about this crisis for years, and you've been pushing it away. So you may not have understood the technical details, but that in part is because you chose not to take an interest in the subject. Or you had some story about environmentalists being unwashed or unemployed or something. And I understand that you lead busy and hectic lives, and I'm not here to point the finger. But at some point you have to take a moment to look in the mirror and accept this reality. Humans are driving their own extinction, and most people either don't care or are ignorant to these things. And this is not someone else's problem. This is our problem. It's your problem. It's the problem of your progeny. This is a global problem, and the opportunity to fix it is slipping away from us. Climate change is not some minor inconvenience like strawberries growing out of season. Climate change is the collapse in global food production. You need to wake up. Climate change is not just the summers coming earlier and staying for longer. Climate change is tens of millions of refugees from Africa and Southeast Asia and the Middle East coming to your country because they can't grow food anymore or it's too hot to go outside. We're out of time to fix this mess, and we need you to become a part of the solution and not continually making it worse through your consumption and inaction. This is a global emergency of civilization, and if we do not do what is necessary, we'll all end up in Armageddon, a Holocaust, an apocalypse covering the whole world. We need to wake up and get into action. And the first thing is to recognize the need to attune our spirituality to nature, because nature is our life support system. And spirituality is the primary motivator of human action.